Alright, y'all, so in celebration of Novak Djokovic's 36th birthday, I decided this would be a great opportunity to reminisce upon the greatness of his career and try something new here on the channel. Of course, with a career as prolific and legendary as Djokovic's, I think this makes for a really captivating premise. Obviously, tier lists are nothing new, but with such a long-spanning career, with mostly sustained excellence for the better part of the last 2 decades, I am tasking myself with the challenge of ranking every Novak Djokovic season dating back to 2007 and placing them accordingly in tiers from S being the best all the way down to D being the worst. Obviously, I know Djokovic turned pro in 2003, and by '06 he had definitely established himself as one of the up-and-coming talents who had next. But I decided I'd start at 2007 just because I thought that was the year that really established Novak as a fixture at the top of the game, and he basically has never left since. So without further ado, let us get into ranking these seasons, and we are of course going to begin in chronological order with that aforementioned 2007 season. Now I really do think that before Novak became the Novak we know today, in 2011, the period before beginning with this 2007 season really goes under the radar. You may not think of Novak among the greatest teenagers of all time, but for about 99% of greats still, Djokovic got off to a pretty quick start in his career, and I think '07 was a really landmark moment there. As a teenager, of course, he took out his first big title in Miami, and as he rose through the rankings really quick into that top 3 echelon, really put in some excellent slam results this year. Semis at Roland Garros and Wimbledon, and then a maiden major final at the US Open, and I think a signature moment there with his run in Montreal, defeating, at the time, the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st best players in the rankings with Roddick, Nadal, and Federer en route to that title. Ended this year deservedly among the top 3, and really great year given his age. In the grand scheme, of course, he's had many better since, but nonetheless, really important year for Novak here, so I'm going to place it in B tier. Moving on up next to 2008, Novak Djokovic, I would say, definitely built upon that breakthrough '07 season. Didn't take him long at all to get on the board at the majors as he took out the first slam of the year in Australia. And I would say that his first Australian Open title is underratedly one of his best and most dominant among the 10 and counting he has won. And having tasted major glory, there was no real letdown the rest of the year. Uber consistent all year with the exception of one early exit at Wimbledon. But other than that, Novak conquered some more big titles throughout the year. I think this was really the first year that he teased that down the line he was going to be the toughest challenge to Nadal on clay. 2 Masters out in Indian Wells and Rome. And like he began the year super strong, ended it super strong as well, taking out the first of his record 6th year-end championship trophies. So obviously, I think this is a super underrated year in Novak's career. I hold it in pretty high regard, and I think it deserves its spot in A tier. On to Novak's 2009 season. I view this year as really a worse version of 2007. Worse slam results, and I think until post-US Open, a clear step back from '07 and '08. Obviously, the year still had its bright spots. Still had 2 quarters and a semi in slams. And really memorably so, him and Nadal played an epic trilogy throughout that clay court season. And then to end the year, as I mentioned before, he finished really strong, and I think began a trend of Novak being one of the most reliable players throughout the Asian and indoor swing at the end of the year. 3 of his 5 titles on the season came during that stretch, but ultimately I do feel there was a bit of stagnation in this year, and of course '09 into 2010 marked the worst ever form of Djokovic's serve. He was tinkering with it, and that of course really hampered him, so I'm going to put this season in C tier. So on to 2010, and I think a lot of people know that of those pre-2011 years, I think this one definitely is the weakest as a season. Between the physical problems that contributed to his loss in the quarters of the Australian Open, as well as blowing the two-set lead to Jurgen Meltzer in the quarters of the French, Novak described the early part of this season really being him hitting rock bottom. I believe he said that after that Meltzer loss at the French, he was contemplating retirement. And while his results weren't awful, and he was still able to have pretty good slam results with 2 quarters and a semi. Up till the US Open this year obviously was not hitting the mark, especially to Djokovic's standards. But the 2010 US Open definitely, I think, was a saving grace. It was a bit of an inflection point. Saving those match points against Federer in the semis in heroic fashion definitely re-inspired some belief in Djokovic. He played a really good final, challenging one of the best Nadal on hard courts, in my opinion. Finished the year strong after that. Played probably his best tennis of the year to take out Davis Cup for Serbia. As a whole, I'd still give the season C tier, but I think it finished in a way where he had set himself up for big things in 2011. 2011, it's S tier. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Absolutely legendary year. I've said before on this channel, this is my pick for the best Djokovic ever. Woke up like a Terminator unleashed. Finished 2010 strong, but I think all of us would be lying if we said we saw that coming the following year. Everyone knows the 3 slams, the 5 masters, began the year 41-0. And what's so stupidly dominant about this year is that from the Australian Open through to the US Open, pretty much the most valued stretch of the year, at least to me. And in that stretch, the guy lost 2 matches across 4 slams and 6 of 7 masters he partook in. 2 lost matches, and one of them was a retirement. When I think about that, it just never ceases to amaze me. This is an S tier. This is an easy S tier. If there was anything above S tier, it would be a no-brainer shoo-in. So how would Novak Djokovic follow up that legendary 2011? Pretty damn well, if you ask me. Among one slam seasons, I think Djokovic's 2012 is a really strong one. Not all that many bad losses throughout the course of the year. Obviously began it with another signature moment in Australia, a physical feat for the ages, 5 sets against Murray, just shy of the 5-hour mark in the semis, followed it up 7 minutes shy of the 6-hour mark in the final against Rafa Nadal, one of the greatest matches ever. Novak, of course, edging that one out. Beyond that gave us the trademark week-in, week-out consistency we saw from a prime Djokovic. Much to do with this year being a one-slam season was a very strong season all around for the Big Four, especially each one taking out a major apiece, the Big Three taking out their favorite major. I don't think there's really much to regret out of this season other than maybe going behind the 8 ball with how he went down 2 sets to love to Murray in the US Open final. But other than that, I would say 2012 backed up 2011 just fine. Number 1 for a second straight year and a second Tour Finals title. So I'll give 2012 A tier. So with 2013 next, we saw a year that began and ended with absolute brilliance from Novak. I thought his Aussie Open title run was awesome. Some great performances out of him, as well as a candidate for Match of the Year against Stan Wawrinka. Started the match on a 17-match win streak, but after that you saw a little bit of patchiness throughout the course of the year. A couple of head-scratching losses for sure, but nonetheless, he still delivered some fantastic performances. I think that Monte Carlo final was one of his best ever clay court matches, ended Rafa's reign there, and of course then had him on the ropes in the 5th set in their legendary semifinal at Roland Garros. Made the finals of Wimbledon and the US Open after nonetheless, but mentally I think it's fair to say that RG loss definitely had a bit of a mental hangover effect on him, but it didn't take him long to recapture his dominant best, finish the year on a 24-match win streak. I find 2013 and 2014 hard to evaluate because 2013 still would have been a 3-slam season if not for a peaking Rafael Nadal that season. But compared to 2012, I think there was definitely more patchiness there, so I think this will go in B tier. And when moving on to 2014, obviously he closed 2013 so strong, and he looked like he was continuing that form into the Australian Open. This time, though, in the quarters, came out on the losing end of an epic with Stan Wawrinka. 5-set loss where I would say that he still had plenty of chances to flip the result. Obviously, between that match and another major final loss to Nadal in the final of the French, it was becoming a bit of a pattern with Novak in his last couple major losses and major finals that the killer instinct and clutchness was lacking at times in the big moments. In spite of that, though, 2014 did see him playing pretty damn flawlessly outside of the slams for the most part. Wimbledon 2014, as many of you know, of course, another inflection point. Really dug deep to defeat those mental demons and edge out a super high quality final with Roger Federer there. That result didn't necessarily turn him into 2015 Novak immediately. Followed it up with a super bizarre hard-court swing with a lot of terrible losses, frankly, culminating with losing to Nishikori in the semis of the Open. Another one of those handful of head-scratching losses we saw throughout 2013 and 14 from Novak. Still added plenty of big titles this season and finished the year number 1, but I would say of the years following 2011, 2014 definitely was the one where he left the most on the table, so I'm sticking it in the B tier. And on to 2015. Any guesses where this season's gonna go? I'll start by saying that statistically this is probably the greatest season I have ever seen as a tennis fan from start to finish, and probably of all time as well. This season and form of Novak from 2015 to first half of 2016 has as good a case as any for being the best form of Djokovic there has ever been. Essentially got that 2011 level dominance and consistency, except no burnout at the end of the year, and consistency wise even better considering the guy literally made the final of 15 of 16 events he played that year. You can go down the line, most Masters in a season with 6, made the final of all 4 slams winning 3, most big titles in a season, most big finals in a season. Translation, no-brainer, S tier. 2016 also began in a similar vein. At the business end of the 2016 Australian Open and the Sunshine Double that year, I was seriously wondering if the guy had gotten even better than 2015. He really was making the sport look as easy as anyone ever has, laying down some absolute beatdowns on the best of the best at the time. Seemed like the writing was on the wall for him to complete his career Grand Slam that year, and he did exactly that, playing another really clean tournament at Roland Garros. And that's pretty much where the best of 2016 for Novak ended, with him finally conquering that one elusive French Open. Wind seemed to go out of the sails, he seemed to lose motivation, he was on top of the world, and no one was really even close at that point. And then, of course, it didn't take long before he started having issues with his elbow. And in spite of him still having some decent results after that, it really was a tale of two halves for Djokovic this year. Never was really the same this season. But that being said, still, with a GOAT-level first half of the season, I honestly think that alone carries this season into the A tier. Now, 2017, it really took all those issues from the second half of 2016 with motivation, as well as, probably more importantly, the physical aspect being compromised with the elbow injury getting worse and worse. All of that came to a boil this year, and it's, I think, easily the worst year of Djokovic's career. Earliest exit in Australia I can ever remember for him. Really just looking like a shell of himself all year. Really no point going into the specifics of the season. Elbow injury ultimately forced him out of competition altogether. Had to pack it in after Wimbledon. So, it goes without saying this one belongs in the D tier. And then that segues into 2018, which did not start too dissimilarly from where he left off in 2017. Became pretty clear early in his comeback that he was going to have to do something about the elbow, get surgery. And even after doing so, it was perhaps after that Djokovic really hit rock bottom. One of his worst ever stretches, really, going from Indian Wells through Madrid. Started playing considerably better, I think, in Rome, but the French Open provided the biggest setback where, unexpectedly, he lost to Marco Cecchinato, and was famously so frustrated after that match he did not know whether he was going to play on grass. And lo and behold, another turning point. Pretty much launched his current Wimbledon dynasty with that year's edition of the tournament. Him and Rafa contested one of their best ever matches in the de facto final of that tournament, and from then on Novak never looked back. Went from out of the top 20 back to number 1 in record time. A dominant US Open run followed and confirmed his resurgence. Much like 2016, just off half of a season, I think this one gets the A tier. As far as 2019 is concerned, it began how 2018 left off, with Djokovic going guns blazing, put in some of his best ever performances at the back end of the 2019 Australian Open, particularly the final where he played about as well as he could, putting in a thorough dismantling of Rafa Nadal in the final in a way that Nadal had never taken in a Grand Slam final. But beyond that, I think 2019 also introduced us to a lot of the tendencies and the type of player that post-prime period Novak Djokovic has been. Really wanting to prioritize the slams and peak for them, and in the process coasting through portions of the season with an older body, no longer to put in the week-in, week-out consistency of his prime. But still, ultimately, whenever the chips are down, being as good as anyone in the game. Obviously, that rang true in that 2019 Wimbledon final, one of, if not the most clutch performance of Djokovic's career. And that's really what does it for me about 2019. In spite of the fair share of bad losses throughout the year, 2 slams, I still put it in A tier. Now on to 2020, another one that's hard to evaluate because obviously it was a truncated season due to the virus going around throughout the course of the year. The year, of course, began with another long winning streak. Pre-pandemic break, I believe he'd reached an 18-0 mark to begin the year, winning the Australian Open and Dubai and ATP Cup prior to both. And he was looking super impressive out of the gates. Winning streak after resumption, I believe, did continue all the way to 26, before, of course, the freak accident in New York with hitting the lines lady, being disqualified. Real opportunity to add on his major tally left on the board there. And while he did still win upon the resumption of the tour, make the finals of Roland Garros after the US Open, the level and aura of invincibility never really seemed the same as it was before the break. Caught some unlucky breaks, no Wimbledon being played, as well as the freak accident at the US Open. Still, I think his 2020 could have been better than it ended up being, so I will put it in the B tier. That being said, in 2021, he left no stone unturned in a year where I thought his best clay tennis was well behind him, and that I really couldn't see it as feasible for any of the big three past 30 really to have another 3-slam season in them. Novak Djokovic made me out to look like a fool on all those counts in 2021. Some really astonishing physical feats and performances, particularly at the Australian Open and Roland Garros. The latter where he delivered his signature moment of the season. Played a great match to hand Nadal just his 3rd loss at the tournament ever. And then proceeded to come closer than anyone since Rod Laver to achieve the calendar Grand Slam, all in his age 34 season. Absolutely absurd, and no doubt that it belongs in the S tier. And then following 2021, given the context of Djokovic's 2022 season, how much action he had to be sidelined for, once he shook off some early rust, whenever he did play, he was utterly exceptional. In a way, I think being sidelined as long as he was kept him fresh, and all the more motivated when he could play to make the best of it. And as a result, I think we got arguably Djokovic's best year outside of slams in this post-prime period. In addition to capturing one of the 2 slams he was able to play at Wimbledon, he really was zoned in to make the best of his situation, keep his ranking afloat with limited action. And he ended up doing exactly that, finishing the season on a tear, capturing his first year-end championship since 2015. So given the context, I put 2022 into the A tier. And that is wraps on my tier list for Novak Djokovic's seasons. Feel free to leave your own thoughts about the ranking in the comment section below. Again, I'd like to wish Novak Djokovic a happy 36th birthday. I probably won't be able to get the video out exactly on his birthday, but hopefully within the day after. But anyways, that will do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like. Only takes a second, it helps the video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.